Hello everyone, welcome to the 12th Internally Screening Podcast. My name's Adam.
My name is Rupert.
And today we're going to be talking about 3 films, a whole 3 films. You're getting 50% extra for your money this time around. We will be discussing 2 films from October, Dune, the new Denis Villeneuve space epic that everyone has been losing their minds over recently. We'll be talking about Last Night in Soho, the latest Edgar Wright film, which has polarised some opinion, which we will absolutely dive headfirst into. And finally, the film I recommended last time, Lady Vengeance, the final part of Park Chan-wook's loosely arranged Vengeance trilogy. I don't know what the official title of that trilogy is, if it even has one.
The Vengeance trilogy, I think.
Okay, it is that. All right. But first of all, we'll dive into Dune, the absolute monster of a film that it is. Rupert, tell us a little bit about Dune.
So yeah, Dune is sort of I think fairly long in the works love child by Denis Villeneuve, Canada's current hottest export, directorially, who, you know, has kind of been grasping at the mainstream. I mean, he's absolutely like a mainstream director, but it feels like he's kind of not really cemented his place yet after the Blade Runner 2049 flop.
Right.
As much as people love that film, it just really didn't perform commercially. And, you know, most of his other successful films have been like middlingly successful or sort of small successes, films like Prisoners and Sicario.
Yeah.
So this is like his grand statement. I'm glad Warner Brothers decided to stick with him. Here it is, finally, the unadaptable Dune, based on the Frank Herbert 60s novel. And I guess it's almost a little inspired by the disastrous 80s Lynch adaptation, which a lot of people have some fondness for. It's mostly an object of fascination for Lynch devotees, though, at this point.
Yeah.
I've been looking forward to this film for ages. I have to say, I absolutely loved it. Adam, what did you think of Dune?
I was a big fan of it as well. I think that the kind of, if I were to describe it in a sentence, it would be, it was exactly what I hoped it would be.
Yeah.
And in some ways, that was good and bad. To an extent that it was bad, it was that because I got exactly what I expected, I wasn't necessarily like thrilled by it. I was like, if I was making this story, if I imagined this on the big screen, what would it look like? And this is exactly how it would look and how it should look. I think first and foremost, aesthetically, it is unbelievably gorgeous. And I mean, Villeneuve is so known for that at this point. Every film he's made has been gorgeous in some way or another, particularly Blade Runner 2049. Like, you know, that aspect of that film has made it so iconic. It even has like a small stake in the meme economy because of certain beautiful shots in that, and obviously the Ryan Gosling factor. So, and I think that's important in capturing the minds of the younger generation. You know, getting a hold on those people, I think, has probably helped significantly in getting Dune to be as kind of monstrously huge as it has been, and that's huge as well. The fact that this film this story still has such a legacy to it, that people still care, like decades and decades, not even after the book has been released, but after multiple failed attempts at adapting that book. It's really
there was
really
a TV show as well,
right. And it's nice to see this ridiculous high concept sci-fi get not only the treatment it deserves, but the recognition it deserves thereafter. But in terms, I mean, top to bottom, this is class. My only qualms with it, really, apart from just a general personal lack of excitement, because I got everything I expected, and its ending is abrupt, which makes sense because it is part 1, and it's explicitly part 1 from the outset, unless it's a shock from, you know, the trailers, because the trailers don't really divulge that information explicitly. There's been press releases and things like that saying, oh, I really want to do a continuation. But what is very clear the moment the film starts, when it says part 1, is, oh, he's making it, or he's like, you know, it's in the works already. It's not a question of if this film does well, necessarily. But
I thought it was just like a really refreshing film. Like, it just feels like a lot of the sci-fi market has been sucked up as of late by kind of cheap Netflix films, partly, and also just the fact that because so much of the attention economy is now, in terms of films, is consumed by the MCU. And as the MCU films have progressed, they've become more and more sci-fi, as you'd expect, right? It feels like so much just sci-fi stuff has been sucked up by trashy throwaway Netflix stuff that people watch and forget in a week, and these films that have sci-fi elements but like barely, that's kind of where people seem to be getting their sci-fi fix. So what I really enjoyed was just like sitting down and watching like just a straight sci-fi epic film. And I guess, like, you know, you could come and argue like, oh, it's not really like a sci-fi film, it's more of a soft fantasy film with the, you know, futuristic elements. And I know it's not technically sci-fi like Star Trek or something, but it was just cool to sit down and watch something that was very self-serious, completely invested in its own lore. Because I think one of the things with adapting Dune is when you have a book so wordy and psychedelic, you can make mistakes in sort of trying to cut corners and in trying to be too clever about how you go about adapting it.
For sure.
As in, like, you know, like changing major elements of the story, or you know, just like completely shifting things,
like condensing things down into like put to a point where they're like no longer intelligible from the original. Yeah, exactly. And I think this was a much more simple way, like simple and better way to adapt it, because, and I think it has to have been the first part. When you look at the amount of information this film gives you in the time that it gives you, the length is actually like massively impressive how they kept it as short as it is. Yeah, I like that they just took the very direct way of adapting it, and there is stuff that it cuts out because the nature of Dune is that it's very psychedelic and there's lots of visions and stuff like that, and a lot of that is kind of cut out, but that makes sense because, you know, you have to deliver a film that is cohesive, and it only cuts corners where it absolutely has to, and for the most part it's trying to be as true to the books as possible. And I think you can see that in the reaction that people have been having to it, because this has been, you know, a pretty mainstream, commercially successful film, and also Dune diehards also seem to be really into it, which is a tough trick to pull off. So credit to Denis Villeneuve for that, because for sure, good luck trying to get, like, there are still Lord of the Rings books fans that don't like the trilogy of films. So I guess this is, if the next two Dune films, I think there are supposed to be two more after this, one based on the second half of Dune and then the other based on Dune Messiah, the book. If we do get 3 films, this, you know, fingers crossed, Denis Villeneuve hasn't really missed yet. When you look at his filmography, he is incredibly consistent in churning out really fucking good films that have only just now started to get the sort of mainstream recognition that they really deserve. So I'm incredibly hopeful for it. And one more thing, just on the note of how efficient this film is in delivering the feeling and the concept of the book, is I love how well this film deals with exposition. It was something, because what you're there to see is the spectacle, and like you said, Blade Runner 2049 is like, you could almost watch it as a silent film, and when it does do exposition, you know, there's still long stretches of the film with almost no dialogue and just these beautiful shots. That's what you want from a Denis Villeneuve film, and I love how this film delivers exposition, like with the main character Paul, like when he's got the like the sort of teaching device, and the way they weave it into scenes and stuff like that, and like all of the politics of it is really easy to get into it. And it doesn't feel like it's hand-holding you, or just like spewing lines upon lines of monologues of information into your face in a really like unbelievable way, like, you know, like something like the prequel trilogy, you know. Right. Yeah. I just love to see a sci-fi film that's just fully about being as weird and just embracing it as it can be, because I just don't feel like we get that much of it anymore. No, you don't. I think everything plays things very safe, and like you say, so much of that genre is dominated by Marvel, and the Marvel formula is becoming more and more blatant and diluted. You know what I mean? Like, it's just it's almost embarrassing how similar these films are at this point. The Marvel formula is also now the Star Wars formula. So Star Wars, the other big sci-fi franchise that isn't really sci-fi, that's also, they kind of feel like Marvel films now, right? Yeah, it's kind of inescapable. Moving on to the performances of this film, I think it's amazing how many huge names they managed to grab for this cast list. It's like absolutely jam-packed. I think Timothée Chalamet is absolutely perfect for the role. Again, if you asked me to imagine what that character would look like or be like or act like, he's this kind of perfect balance of, you know, intrigued and kind of, he has some fight in him, but he is weedy. He's kind of unsuspecting and like, or unassuming, I should say. He got that naivety to him, as well as that promise, that glint in the eye. I think that's excellent. I think Oscar Isaac does a great job as well. He's very commanding. I really enjoyed the relationship between those two. Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to believe that he's his dad because Oscar Isaac looks so different, but I really enjoyed the interaction that those two had. It felt like very genuine. Like they had a lot of on-screen chemistry.
For sure. And Oscar Isaac's, I'm a big fan of Oscar Isaac. I need to see more by him. I need to see stuff like Inside Llewyn Davis. But, you know, he was obviously very charismatic in Star Wars. But he's my favourite role from him has got to be the Ex Machina. He's so excellent in Ex Machina.
Playing creepy Drake, or Drake, I guess.
Yeah, he does. It's ridiculous, isn't it? In the perhaps brief amount of time we get with Oscar Isaac's character, it would be maybe nice to get more time with him, but what we do get of him is fantastic.
Rebecca Ferguson as Paul's mum, I thought was really great as well, because she had this kind of, like, when you go to like a mum role in this kind of film, you kind of expect something very typical, but she actually has quite a lot of agency in the film, and she has her own kind of intriguing character past. There's this kind of lore about she's part of the Bene Gesserit order, and they're these kind of they're basically like eugenics witches, and they're like breeding this like psychic race of mostly women, but she's been secretly doing it on Paul, and her performance I thought was really good as well, because you have that kind of dark edge to her, but she's also like very like protective, and you know she has like her own emotions with stuff that goes on in the film, and like relationships with multiple characters. She had like a really interesting role, and she plays a pretty big part, I would say. Yeah. Like, she's one of the more on-screen characters. She's most of them.
I mean, in terms of this first part, she's one of the most pivotal characters, like second, if not arguably first, given that the amount of sort of string pulling she has going on behind the scenes. Obviously, as the events of the film develop, things get taken out of her control, but I really like how in the family dynamic she actually seems to hold most power, because she has these cards kept so close to her chest. Oscar Isaac is really more of like a figurehead and an image of power than he is actually particularly commanding in the family, at least.
I also wanted to shout out my boy Stellan Skarsgård,
my God,
doesn't really get much screen time, but there's something about that kind of villain, like super cheesy, super kind of gross and mean. With and I love the design of him and the way he like floats around, and he's got that cool like voice modulation. And I love Stellan Skarsgård as a villain, and I thought he was so much fun every time he was on screen. There's a few particular scenes which I really loved, like his introduction. There's some really excellent sound design with him. Like there's this thing where like he's got these like bionics and they sort of like click into place on him, right? And it makes these like really like cool noises. And then there's one particular scene with him and Oscar Isaac, which I can't really talk about in detail for spoilers, that I just thought was just a great scene. The way it was presented was excellent as well. It looked like a painting. And,
it does. Oh wow, I forgot about that.
And the way even though he doesn't get enough screen time, in my opinion, I mean, it works for the story. I think we'll get much more in the second part, but I loved pretty much everything with him in it. Even though I know, like, you could probably criticize him for being kind of a cheesy character, it just kind of worked for me really well.
I don't know. I think rather than it being cheesy, I think that character is just an archetype. Like, you can see how ideas from Dune have been borrowed and co-opted into so many other sci-fi properties over the years. When you return to a character that has that influence, it's very easy to cast a modern gaze on it and go, oh, that's derivative, or that's borrowing. But not so much the inception of a character like that, but an iconic interpretation that has been, worked on. So no, I had no problem with that at all. Like, there's obvious Darth Vader comparisons I'm sure many people will draw, but obviously this is the kind of gross Roman dictator version, where he's gorging himself, he's this horrible slug-like creature, he's just like
it's so cool. I love it.
He's bathing in like vats of what I mean, they
slime.
look like they don't slime, they almost look like caviar at points, you know what I mean? I liked kind of two less important roles, but I just liked seeing them there, was Dave Bautista and John Dalmastian. I can never pronounce this name. The guy that played Polka Dot Man. Hang on.
He was good.
David Dasmalkian. Okay, there you go. Yeah, they played wonderfully, like, greasy, sickly looking alien servants of Stellan. I mean, they're not really there much. It's just good to see them getting their props, and
they're both Denis Villeneuve regulars. So
yeah, Bautista was in 2049, wasn't he? He was in the opening of that, and David Dasmalkian was in Prisoners. Yeah. We're
also forgetting Aquaman.
We are forgetting Aquaman. We're forgetting
he was
Aquaman,
great as well.
We're forgetting Thanos.
Again, a character I thought could be... I mean, I didn't really have much opinion on Josh Brolin. I thought he was pretty good, but obviously his character, something's going to happen in the second one with him.
Right. Okay.
I was quite a big fan of Jason Momoa in this film, though, because, again, it's the kind of character... His character's name is Duncan Idaho, which is kind of hilarious.
Duncan Idaho.
Yeah, exactly. But his character's like... I thought I would hate it, and I actually, like, kind of enjoyed it. It was just kind of... It's like a slightly cheesier role. Yeah. But it's like perfect casting.
Oh, yeah.
And for what he does in the film, I thought he was great.
Yeah, I think he has kind of... He's the sort of actor that's in danger of putting himself into a corner in terms of what people see him as.
Yeah.
Because, sure, in Game of Thrones, he was really intimidating, vile... character that was really interesting for the time he was there, but because he didn't speak any English, it was also kind of hard to gauge how emotive he was really being, if that was more like he was being disguised under layers of the character that were out of his control. And then obviously he's done such a hard pivot with Aquaman and roles that exploit his charm and charisma, but he's got it's rare in those sorts of films and roles that you can see if he's actually capable of holding a scene on his shoulders when he's not punching something in the face. And this gives a little bit more. This gives more of that, sure, he is still cheesier and quippier than most, but there is more heart and character and soul in amongst that this time. He is more vulnerable. And I agree. I think he did a great job. Just wonderful casting all round, really.
I think the main takeaway for me from Dune was also just that it has the kind of... It's quite deep. It has the thematic power to it, and the performances, as we've just talked about, are all really, really solid across the board. But the main takeaway for me is just as a piece of spectacle filmmaking, it's so well done. Just the visuals of it. There's a few scenes that particularly stand out to me. Pretty much everything to do with the worms in this film.
Oh my god.
So in Dune, set on the desert planet of Arrakis, you have these space worms. Do they live off the spice? I can't remember. They have some interaction with the spice that they're trying to harvest.
I actually can't remember, to be honest.
But basically, they're like a fucking menace. And every time they're trying to harvest the spice that they get high on, and they also use it for space travel, these worms will come up and eat these entire huge ships. And there's one sort of big spectacular scene. It's sort of like the first real action scene of the film.
Yeah.
Where a worm is headed towards this spice harvester machine that's malfunctioning, so the people can't get off of it. And it was just it actually had that sense of scale. Because I find, again, I mean, I hate bringing it back to this, but so much sci-fi that we see these days is Star Wars and the MCU.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can give you that sense of scale. The last time I really remember getting that sense was actually in The Last Jedi, where they had the Star Destroyer fly into the...
the Lightspeed Ram.
Yeah, that was cool. I remember that, and I was like, wow, that actually feels big.
Yeah.
And since then, I mean, like all the MCU films, it does feel but like green screen stuff, you know. After that, like and even in that film, The Last Jedi, there was a lot of stuff that felt like, it felt like it was shot on a set. When I was watching that, it felt big. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was so involving, and when the worm comes up underneath the freighter,
it's awesome. Yeah,
so cool.
It's monumental on a level that you just do not see in most films nowadays. And again, I think that's largely down to budget. Like, no one's giving those sorts of ridiculous ideas the time or day. Do you know what I mean? It requires, you know, the clout of both Dune and Villeneuve to get that on the screen.
Also, just the way it's directed is great, because it kind of like Arrival does a similar thing, right? With the way the ships arrive. When you finally see the ships, it's like, wow, those are fucking big. It's clearly something he's really good at.
Yeah, and I think that's an integral part of this story to get right as well, because there's a kind of... I've read bits of the book. I've never actually been able to sit down and get through the whole thing. That says more about me than the book, to be fair. It's kind of hard to get a sense of the scale, put your head around some of these things. That sometimes something's size is so unquantifiably huge for the human brain to get your head around. And I didn't know how they were going to be able to translate that to the big screen. It just ups that level of threat exponentially. But I like that it's random as well. It's like targeted. It's not a targeted thing. It's just a force of nature, like an unstoppable. It's like a fucking tidal wave or something.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's really frightening as well. Just kind of lumbering agents of chaos in a strange way. That I guess kind of hammers home awesome. Some of like the themes around colonialism and things, and this idea of trying to control a world outside of your out of your reach, essentially. Like, you don't have control over the Fremen, and you try and get them on side, and you don't understand their ways and things like that. Like, I'm doing a terrible job of explaining it, but we will get more into the themes later on. But I do like just how frightening that all is.
It's so cool. And there's another interaction with the worm at the end where I was just kind of sat back. I remember, you know, when you're sitting in the cinema, there's another scene later on where, you know, the worm comes out, and I was just kind of sat back in I was kind of just like, wow. It was just, it has that kind of impact to it. I think Denis Villeneuve, that, and I guess another thing that really makes this film work for me, and I've heard actually kind of a mixed response on this, but I actually really love Hans Zimmer's score to this. It really elevates that sense of scale, I think.
I loved it, yeah.
Yeah, it has that kind of, it has like a sort of Middle Eastern tinge to it, because obviously the planet Arrakis is kind of like an accidentally excellent pre-criticism of the Iraq War, right? The way that the story goes, and the film is obviously playing into that in a big way. And, you know, we've seen all of these, the way the Middle East is generally presented in most Western films is somewhat one note, shall we say. Right. And this film is obviously kind of drawing on that, but it kind of actually, weirdly, even though it's like literally set on another planet, so it's supposed to be quite alien, it actually feels like a more nuanced take on the sort of Middle East imperialism, Iraq war, because we get so many of these like political moments referenced in so many films these days, right? But it's weirdly kind of a refreshing way of doing it, because I feel like so often with stuff like, I don't know, Zero Dark 30 or Black Hawk Down, or, you know, any of these like sort of Iraq War, Gulf War type films, you know, they may as well be treating it like an alien planet,
right? Yeah, because it's all very hyper focused on the American infiltration. There's like very little regard given to the locals, the natives, and the struggles they go through. If they do show the struggles, it's in passing. It's like, oh, look at these families crying as their village burns to the ground, sort of thing.
Yeah,
like,
or something
it's
like
never
that,
like, oh, here I am in their perspective, forced to live among them, and you know, go through what they go through.
Yeah, and I just think weirdly this film, like, it felt like a more interesting take on that set of sort of cultural iconography, you know. It like, I've seen it before in so many films in a post 9/11 world, and weirdly Dune is just like, it felt kind of more interesting. I don't really know how to describe exactly what it was, and I think that Dune Part 2, because you get much more into the Fremen.
Yes, I think that will establish much more of that angle of it,
which again makes me actually like really excited to see the sequel.
Yeah.
And but sorry, this all came from the music. The Hans Zimmer score is really good, and it really elevates that. It has like a lot of sort of Middle Eastern sort of singing and drumming in it, which I thought
the percussion
really
is particularly awesome. And again, it's Middle Eastern tinged, but it's distinct. It's like distorted to make it distinct from that in such a way as to be kind of like eerie and unusual. Like there's this chanting and stuff like that. I thought it was like beautifully implemented, and it gave it a really unique flavor. I think so many scores opt for the same kinds of things. Even some of Hans Zimmer's best scores often sort of end up cropping up again and again in other films, kind of borrowing a lot from, say, like Johan Johansson, rest in peace. I rewatched Arrival the other day, and that film had an absolutely cracking soundtrack, but then from that film onwards, you find lots of other sci-fi films of similar styles going for the same things. So it's really refreshing to see something completely different entering this film.
I think what a lot of people criticised about the soundtrack is that classic Hans Zimmer is very loud. It really relies on that sort of quiet to loud transition, which is like something that I think is actually quite a fair criticism of a lot of his soundtracks, but I actually think it works quite well here, and particularly when, and I mean, it's kind of unreasonable for me to expect most people or even that many people to do this. But when you actually listen to the soundtrack outside of the film, there's actually much more building and dynamics to it than like something like if you listen to the soundtrack he did for like Man of Steel or any of the DC films he did. Those soundtracks are just really loud.
Right.
And they sound kind of epic when you're watching the film, but it does kind of sound like someone just beating the shit out of a keyboard. Whereas this, if you actually listen to it, there's like a real kind of progression to a lot of the tracks. And I can't wait to rewatch it so I can re-experience that with that in my mind.
Yeah. Going into some criticisms I heard around this film, as it was coming out, a lot of people were criticizing it for being sort of overly long, or like the pacing was off and things like that. I've already discussed how the ending kind of leaves it on a slightly awkward cliffhanger, which again I don't have a problem with, in so much as when the next film comes out, is provided that's good, I think that will evaporate from me as a problem. I guess if I was trying to look at it holistically and say, okay, this film exists purely as this film, that ending is disappointing. I guess it is. But would I look at Lord of the Rings in the same way? Like, the end of Fellowship is epic, but it's also like, I'm eager for more, and you're left in the lurch in terms of them about to start a new journey. So
but what I would say about that is, though, because I've heard this criticism, is that something that Fellowship does have over this is that by the end of the film, Frodo, Sam, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, those characters have kind of done a full sort of arc from the beginning to the low point of Gandalf dying, and then by the end they're kind of like rejuvenated, right?
Yeah.
So there is kind of a more satisfying character arc, and they kind of hit all those beats. Whereas in Dune, I think it's a fair criticism to say that it does kind of feel like we're kind of stopping in the middle.
Yes. No, you're right. I think it is difficult to separate. It's a kind of unusual situation having to separate it, because could you imagine if this film came out as a 5-hour film, and maybe as a holistic piece of art, that would be better. The unfortunate part of that then being is that it's completely unmarketable to the majority of the film going audience, but as a piece of art, it's far more complete and cohesive. I guess that's the difficulty we have. Are we grading it's hard to grade that ending as the ending of a film when it's really the middle of two films. It's a difficult one. I am torn on it, because I agree on one hand and I'm sympathetic to it on another. But when it comes to the pacing, I really don't understand the criticism of it. I think that criticism probably comes from people that don't know the story tremendously well and were perhaps expecting more fireworks than they got.
I don't really understand it, because I feel like you got plenty of fireworks, and I think that the pacing, particularly at the beginning, is really good, because you get a really slow build, and I was actually kind of like really hoping, I was like, oh god, I hope they don't just kick into action like right here.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I was like, please just let this like play out, and it did for like a little bit longer than I expected, which I really appreciated, because the film kind of lets it breathe a bit, and it has, it lets all of these story beats and these like character things like kind of just live a little, And then when it kicks off, it does kick off. And then the sort of, I would say that the last hour of the film is pretty breakneck in terms of action.
Yeah, because you go from, I mean, this is a delicate place. Do we go into spoiler territory?
We can go into a little bit of spoilers. So I guess, should we just say, we both recommend Dune? I'd give it an 8 out of 10.
Are we doing that already? All right, I'll give it an 8
just for anybody who's trying to avoid spoilers.
Okay, yeah, I would also give it an 8 out of 10. We will put timestamps in the description, so you can jump ahead to our discussion of Last Night in Soho as well. 3, 2, 1, bang, spoiler time. Yeah, from that sort of that last stretch of the film, you're going from the explosion of the palace the explosion of the armada and the infiltration of the palace, straight into them being kidnapped on the plane, a helicopter thing, them landing in the desert, them getting attacked by Fremen. What, do they get captured by Fremen? What's that bit when they're they're with like soldiers, aren't they?
Yeah, it's the soldiers of, like, they have like a little some of the soldiers who escape from the palace, plus then the soldiers who get sent by the Harkonnens roll up.
Then Duncan Idaho does his sick, he does his fucking excellent action piece. I remember there was a really cool effect in that, actually. They had like some kind of laser thing, didn't they? They were trying to like carve through a door to get to them.
Have like
and it was just like a beam of light. It wasn't like, colorized or anything. It was just like a white beam, but they knew if they went anywhere near it, they'd get cut in half. And I quite liked that. It was like danger in something. It was like a slight twist on a classic sci-fi image and visual that, although subtle, kind of really made my mind work to like imagine like, oh wow, in recontextualizing it, you've made me put myself in that position more concretely than I otherwise would have been. Similarly, as another small detail, bit of a tangent, but there's like these weird like light orbs that follow them around, and they don't like hover or bob around. They just stay still. They're like perfectly static in the air, but they just follow them. And there's just something nice about effects like that. And again, we've seen similar things with like the way the Arrival spaceships just stay in the air. They're not moving. There's no like, it's weirdly organic but mechanical at the same time. There's like this kind of strange juxtaposition between those two ideas that's really interesting and visually kind of is somewhat uncanny. It catches you off guard if you're looking at it. But I just really appreciate that. Again, it's that transformation of sci-fi ideas into something new, which you don't get an awful lot of nowadays. It's a lot of recycling of ideas. And then I guess the film hits you with them encountering the Fremen and having this weird,
and the worm.
Oh, of course,
they're chased.
Yes, they're being chased. Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. It's like pretty non-stop action.
Yeah, you're right.
Once you get past that like first hour and a half.
And I really love that first hour and a half. Honestly, the first hour and a half might be my favourite part of the film.
You also have the scene where they like crash land the Dragonfly helicopter,
Yeah, you're right. It is filled to the brim. I guess it's just not the conventional thing that a lot of audiences are expecting nowadays. You're not fighting hordes of enemies. It's not.
No beam in the sky.
Yeah, no classic beam. It's a lot less colourful. It's a lot more dour, especially as you go, the more time spent on Arrakis, the more kind of visually monotone it is, in so much as when you're exploring the palaces and the other planets in the building exposition, it's all very like visually intense because you're getting all these new images and it's all like, whew, you're being overwhelmed. And then you're suddenly on this planet for ages. And I can see, for me as well, I did find it as like, oh well, there's less of visual interest for me right now, and I can see that being a problem for some people, particularly if they're not invested in the action. But I think
the
that's
little
such
details,
a
like you're saying, though, right? Because the film is just quite immersive in the details that it gives you, that it doesn't really go out of its way to explain. Like, for me, one of the most memorable sequences of the entire film that I just loved was the throat singing scene, where it's setting up this like mercenary army, and for no reason there's just a guy throat singing, and they're like baptizing the soldiers in blood in this like kind of huge kind of industrial looking like field where there's like these soldiers like baptizing each other, and there's just this guy going it was so fucking cool. I like just don't explain it, and you just it's just there,
Yeah.
and like it just feels like, oh wow, it feels lived in. It's like lore writing itself as you're watching, and it just intrigues you. Yeah,
I love all the stuff with Harkonnen is so cool. He has like a fucking pet spider dog or something at one point.
Yeah.
Just this weird creature like lumbers into the room, and you're like, what the fuck is that? And then it just no explanation. it's gone in the next scene, sort of thing. I love that. I love the details of that. Yeah, like you say, it's what draws you in. Yeah, because for as much exposition as this film has to do to get you on side, it's as we've said, remarkably efficient in doing so. It's fluid. It's got great pace to it. In that regard, I particularly like the way they've handled the truth or the box scene where he has to put his hand in the box.
That was a great scene.
A very easy scene to fuck up because you have to convey the seriousness and intensity and the danger that he's going through, but visually he's got his hand in a box. So those are two very contrasting things.
It all rests on Timothée Chalamet and the way you sequence the shots, right?
Yeah.
And Timothée Chalamet, like we said, he's just great in this film. He's like perfectly cast. The character's like a bit of a blank slate, and I think he's kind of perfect for that.
Yeah.
Because he's got the chops to act with this kind of weedy like character who's got this potential that he hasn't quite realised yet. And yeah, he's got like the character. He does a great performance. He's that scene in particular probably very awkward to shoot, and he just does a great job of it. Because like you said, it could be laughable, but he nails it.
Yeah, and I like the woman he's acting alongside, which
she's a bit of a legend actually.
Let me just check.
Charlotte Rampling.
Charlotte Rampling, yes.
Yeah.
Who was weirdly in a film we just reviewed, Orca. She's in Orca.
Oh, of course. She's like a legendary actor though. She's a really good actress.
I don't think I've seen her in much else, but it's really weird to have watched Orca and then go, wait a minute. I know you. Yeah,
she's great in that
sinister.
as well. Very spooky, yeah. And the costuming for her is great.
Yes, yeah.
Because it's kind of
the black veil. Yeah,
I've only read like a bit of the book. I've made it like, I don't know, maybe a third of the way through it.
I think that's about where I've got up to,
she is kind of exactly how I imagined that character. So great job with that.
Yeah. 100%. But yeah, the first act of the film just does such a masterful job of handling exposition in a really gripping way, in a really erudite and just efficient way that just gets it sorted, but still makes it captivating. But then you do still get these scenes where not everything is explained to you, where the visuals do a lot of the colouring in for you, and you're allowing yourself to walk in the character's shoes without just being bombarded with information, which is a very fine line to cross, to tread, I should say. So many films fail in that regard. Thinking of weird, lofty sci-fi things that went wrong, Jupiter Ascending comes to mind. That film is, obviously
so much exposition in that.
Infamous mess, but yeah, it's just you're bombarded with information, and it's throughout. Like, it never stops. By the end of the film, you're getting new shit. It seems like all characters can do is talk to each other in exposition. And then again, a film I really like, Tenet. What the fuck is that? Like, a character cannot talk without doing expository dialogue. This film has a really nice balance of all of that stuff, of legitimate character interaction, really like human, emotive, interactions, but then still enough of that information carried through so you're not just completely fucking lost at any given any given moment.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's pretty masterfully done, and you can tell that, I don't know how much input Denis Villeneuve had in the writing. I think he wrote a fair portion of the film. You can tell that a lot of love and thought has gone into the way this film presents all of because there's so much information to present. You can tell there's so much love and craft has gone into making this as digestible as possible, while also keeping the essence of the book all there. Making it appealing to a mainstream audience, while also not sacrificing the kind of original, maybe some stuff that could be considered sort of quite weird and kooky and dated, like the dragonfly helicopters. I love that it gets that balance so perfect. I really don't have many complaints, other than it's not really a complete story. So
yeah,
and I guess also maybe that some of the violence I did think was like a little bit PG-13. I
Yeah,
understand that's a
maybe have done
concession that
more.
had to be made. If you want to get this film made, like some of the combat, it's a little bit low light, and some of it looks fucking cool. To be fair, I can't hate on it too much. Some of the hand-to-hand stuff is really cool. Some of it is a little bit, PG-13. You don't see any blood or anything.
Yeah.
I understand. I understand why that was done. I would have liked, for me personally, obviously, I would prefer it wasn't like that. But yeah, outside of that, I mean, it's just a really fucking solid film, and I can see myself rating it higher than an 8. Having seen the next 2 parts. So yeah.
For sure. One thing I would add, just at the end, is that I've heard some criticisms about things that were left out of the book. There's one point where the house is being infiltrated by a spy, basically, and it is revealed at one point or another who it is. And apparently there's a lot more time devoted to that subterfuge and the paranoia of trying to work out who the spy in the family home is. And I think that could have been something really interesting and really captivating to see on the screen. I know you have to make sacrifices and compromises when you're building something this huge from something so grand in scale. But I think that was something that was really interesting in the film anyway, that could have been eked out and explored even further.
Yeah, the way it was done was good, but it could have been better. That's
exactly that. Yeah, but as you say, it's an 8 out of 10 from both of us. Easily I'd say easily the finest blockbuster of this year so far.
Oh yeah.
I mean, there's a large gap between the handful of films that I really enjoyed, the big films I enjoyed this year, and the absolute, the chaff we got elsewhere. But that's not to sell this film short. This film...
It'd be a banger in any year.
Yeah, and it's one of the most sort of unreal, large-scale sci-fi films in years. It's so impressive. It's got such an enormity to it. If you haven't seen Dune already... absolutely do. At the soonest convenience to you, absolutely do.
On the biggest screen possible, yeah.
On the biggest screen possible, yes. If it is still on the big screen, I don't know. Ask your dad to buy you a really big telly, I guess, is the only other option.
Get a projector, man.
Get a projector. Do what you can to experience the
watch
insane
it in VR.
visual. Oh my god. But yeah, I think that about wraps up what we have to say about Dune. So we will now move on to Edgar Wright's latest film, Last Night in Soho. Last Night in Soho, I mean, if you're not familiar with Edgar Wright at this point, and you're into films, I don't know what you're doing with yourself. He made the amazing Cornetto trilogy. Hot Fuzz and Shaun of the Dead are 2 of my favourite films. I genuinely think Hot Fuzz is in my top 5 films of all time. I adore that film to death. And me and you both have a long-standing adoration for Edgar Wright. He's a British hero. He's a British hero.
He is.
And
a Canadian hero, because they love Scott Pilgrim so much.
Yeah, true. You weren't that hot on Scott Pilgrim when it first came out. Have you warmed to that?
No, I like it now. It's funny. It's just I still think it's his best, but yeah, I like pretty much. Well, we'll get into this, but I like pretty much all of his films. Yes.
Well, so coming into this, it's been a while since he made his... Well, actually, no, it's not been that long. His last film was Baby Driver, which was fantastic. It's a shame to say it, because of all the allegations against certain cast members. It's like kind of a lot harder to watch, but there was a time when I just needed comfort food. My visual comfort food, and I found it on Netflix. I put it on, and I liked it even more than when I first saw it, and I loved it when I first saw it. So in spite of all of its casting flaws, great film, great action film, and it showed Edgar Wright cementing himself in Hollywood. So Last Night in Soho, bang, Edgar Wright's first horror film. And given that he's dabbled in zombie movies, in thrillers and sci-fi stuff, and he has tried his hand at things close to horror that haven't necessarily gone fully into like the really intense, harrowing side of it. He's always leaned more into the comedy angle. So me and you both, Rupert, were really excited for this, and I'm sad to say that I think we both think it's fucking terrible.
Yep, I hate this film. And I think it's been getting a pass from so many people
based off of it being Edgar Wright.
Yeah, because I get it. Like, I don't think this film's not done very well commercially. Obviously, COVID was a huge part of it. This film didn't get a huge marketing push, and it was released like around the same time as Dune. So, and it got like a limited release, so it was never going to do that well. And I feel like a lot of film people, because that's typically when I go on IMDb or Letterboxd or whatever. That's generally who I read reviews from, because I don't really read critics' reviews, I guess. And I think that the people who just love Edgar Wright are just handing a pass to this film where it's really not deserved at all. And I can kind of understand why, because I saw this film was getting a bit of a mixed response, and I was like, interesting. I hadn't seen any trailers or anything, so I went in totally cold without any biases or anything. I had no idea what to expect, other than the cast basically, and that it was a bit of a horror film or whatever. I'd been excited for this ever since it got announced on IMDb, so I was like really hyped for it. Went in, and for the first hour or so, I was like, man, this film's pretty good. This film is it's building up to something. It's got some interesting threads. I hope this goes somewhere really cool. Because this had all of his directorial flash to it, all these amazing, particularly sort of the back in time sequences. You got these crazy kind of camera stunts. The performances seemed really good at first. The script looked like it was really building to something, and then basically, as the film goes on, it kind of lulls, and I was like, okay, maybe this is where it goes bad. And then as it sort of if you're looking at it on a line graph, it's kind of going. It goes up and up and up, and then it kind of goes down a bit and it plateaus, and then you're like, well, it's going to bring it back for the end, and then it just fucking dips.
It drops off a fucking cliff.
Yeah, this was written by Edgar Wright and his longtime collaborator. I forget her name. They both
Christy
wrote it.
Wilson Cairns.
Her. And this is the worst script. I cannot believe that they decided to make this film with the script in this state, because it is disastrously fucking bad and quite embarrassing at points. Yeah,
it's barely finished. It feels so amateurish. It feels so studenty. It in so much as it feels clueless. It feels like someone trying their hand at something for the first time. But as we know, Edgar Wright has established himself, in my opinion, to be an incredibly witty, entertaining screenwriter as well. Because he's not just a director. He's written, particularly like the Cornetto trilogy. He wrote each of those films with Simon Pegg. Now, I don't know if Simon Pegg's influence on the writing end of it has been propping him up, but I mean, Baby Driver came out fucking great. And so did Scott Pilgrim. So what the fuck happened here? I think we should briefly just touch on what actually happens in this film. So we follow Thomasin McKenzie's character, Ellie, as she's an aspiring fashion designer that moves to London for university. Meets a bunch of wankers on her course, because that's pretty true to life, in fairness. And then she goes to live in a spooky old top floor apartment in Goodge Street, which is hilarious. I love that it's in Goodge Street, which is on the edge of Soho, and she finds herself in this strange waking dream thing where she falls asleep and seems to wake up as a woman in the 60s, played by Anya Taylor-Joy, trying to get her way up the performance ladder. She's singing in bars and things like that. She wants to make the big time, and then spooky stuff happens where she thinks, well, we'll maybe get into that later with spoilers, but it does its horror pivot where things start going awry. It's not so it starts off very romantically. It seems like a very nostalgic trip through the 60s, and I imagine a lot of things that would have influenced Edgar Wright's youth. Edgar Wright's notorious for putting so much of the music he loves into films. We based all of Baby Driver basically around his fucking iPod playlists. And this feels very similar in that regard of like, here's my love letter to the 60s. But, and then he's like, this is the kind of, and then he explores the caveat of his love for 60s culture. Yeah,
I think that the inclusion of music in this film is actually one of the biggest detriments to the quality of the film. Even though it really works in the first half, its inclusion, it has that, you have the opening scene of this film is Thomasin McKenzie dancing to, obviously a vinyl record, and it's this, lovely orchestrated, she's doing her dance, it's beautifully framed, the camera spins around her room, she sits down, it's got a clever mirror shot in it, it feels very Edgar Wright, it's very snappy and cleverly made. The problem is that kind of stuff doesn't work when you're actually trying to be genuinely scary, right? Because you're kind of shooting it like one of Edgar Wright's his comedy action films,
right?
Like something like Baby Driver, it completely tonally works with the film, that this character is singing and dancing. But then as this film gets towards its conclusion, it's genuinely trying to be emotional and scary, and terrifying, and this kind of way it kind of exposes Edgar Wright actually seems like kind of a less talented director in my eyes after this, as harsh as that sounds.
Yeah,
because
it
just goes to show that he can't really direct in any other way. Is this the only way he knows how to direct? By just doing this kind of musical, rhythmic filmmaking where you've got this, snappy soundtrack and these beautifully coordinated visual comedy gags going. It just totally doesn't work, and the film does kind of have this tonal shift that it just feels horrible. It really doesn't work, as the film actually tries to be scary. And I guess if it had shifted from being really poppy and jazzy into actually being scary, that would be something. But I guess the real icing on the shit cake is that it's not very funny. It's just kind of well made, and then it kind of becomes a really bad horror film that's not scary. And
it pivots from being a well-made, kind of boring psychological thriller that starts more promising and kind of lulls into an actively badly made, badly written, badly designed, bad CGI, schlocky horror film finale. It's so basic and so but taking on tropes from the genre that have been hackneyed and outdated for the better part of a decade, that are actively laughable. And I think we weren't really talking to each other when we were watching this film. I was more kind of stunned at what was happening. I didn't want to turn to Rupert and voice my outrage and how upset I was for fear that he was really enjoying it. But as soon as we left the cinema, we were both just like, oh my god, did we just go through this together? I don't know if we can talk much more about the writing without getting into spoilers.
Yeah, let's just say spoilers.
Because, so spoilers from here on out. Again, links down in the description. So, straight into spoilers. When the film changes, and we do this reveal, so the reveal being she has one of her visions and she thinks she sees Anya Taylor-Joy's character being stabbed to death by Matt Smith. And then it becomes her journeying through to discover the truth of the situation. And then she is haunted by these spooky ghost men that are like the people that Anya Taylor-Joy has slept with previously. They are like some of the goofiest looking and most terribly designed CGI villains.
I get what he was going for, and I think conceptually it's interesting, but the way it's executed is really boring. And I think one of the strongest elements of the film is Thomasin McKenzie, because I think she actually does a really good job with what she's given, in terms of what she's given is actually it's a really tough role to play, because the character, she's very I forget her name, the character's name, but Ellie. She's very neurotic. She's quite held back, but then there is moments of the film where she has to kind of dial her character up to 11, and I think she does a really good job of handling that for the most part, even though there are points where it kind of falters, but I don't think that's really down to her. But yeah, she's juggling a lot of tones, and the way that these faceless ghoul characters work is incredibly repetitive, and eventually they basically just seem to appear when the film has had a lull in things that are going on. They just show up and she has to freak out for 5 minutes, and this happens I can't even remember, but it feels like 100 times this happens.
Yeah, it's the same scene over and over again in different
The plot
locations,
just
basically.
stops, and basically there's nothing that scary about them. There's no real threat, since it's pretty clear that they're not actually real and they can't actually harm her in any meaningful way. They don't really do anything interesting. They just kind of walk at her and make noises, and I get symbolically it makes sense, but in the it's the sort of misogynistic traces of the 60s, and that sort of manifested in her nostalgia, or whatever arty words you want to put on it to explain it. But functionally in the film, they are just completely fucking boring. And then there's a reveal thing at the end, which is so funny and just kind of, oh god, that could have worked, I guess, if the film was better made, but it was so cringy when it happened. I'm talking about the bit right at the end where she's in the bedroom and they come up and they go, "Help me!" It was so bad. I was like,
oh wow, yeah,
god.
Yeah,
really, dude.
So the grand thing being it transpiring that Anya Taylor-Joy's character has actually been murdering all these men that she had to sleep with, and that she killed Matt Smith, not the other way around. That sort of the unreliable narrator type stuff could have been an interesting twist, I suppose, if it was handled better. But the goofiness of the design of the monsters, for want of a better word, it honestly reminded me of like a Doctor Who episode. Not to draw, not just because Matt Smith is in this film, but there's a villain.
No, I see that.
There's a villain from his.
Yeah.
Well, no, there's a villain from his series called The Silence, which were like these weird skeleton-faced ghouls. They kind of didn't have mouths. They had like sunken eye sockets. Like they looked very much like this, because like the whole design of these guys, they're grey, kind of smoky looking. They've got like an ill-defined outline, and then their faces are kind of missing, or they're kind of like sunken in, and featureless. Again, on paper, sounds spooky. Like, oh, faceless, like rapey men. Like, oh, and they're like, it's like, it's spooky, but it's also social commentary, because the 60s had all this dark stuff going on with women, which is one of the better aspects of this. And I think I do want to talk about the first sort of half of this film, where things are much better for us as viewers as well as the film. But the messaging of the film has some level of nuance to it that is lost in the cartoonish portrayal of the villains and the the goofiness of its reveals and stuff. And of course, then our grand reveal is, so this is the I believe the last performance from Diana Rigg, rest in peace. Absolute legend, an absolute icon of cinema, and I'm slightly sad that this is her last one. Yeah. Even though
she was in on Her Majesty's Secret Service as well, right?
Yeah. And credit to her. She again does what she can with the material. I would say that of Matt Smith and Anya Taylor-Joy as well.
I think pretty much everybody here does pretty well with the material.
I don't think the performances are that bad.
No, there was only like one performance that I thought was bad.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about as well. We'll get on to that. Diana Rigg is the elderly lady that runs this this kind of apartment block. I say apartment block. It's very old. It's like Victorian, and it's like 3 stories high, and she's just like the landlady. And then it turns out that the reason she's getting these visions from this room is because that's her old room. It's not just some random woman that died there. It's it's the landlady's old room, and she's the murderer that killed all these men and stuff like that. And she then tries to kill. It's such a convoluted ending.
Well, it's also super cheap, because what the film does is it's revealed that Matt Smith kills her, and then we see this kind of brutal stabbing where he stabs her in bed because he's jealous, which, given the information that the film gives you, doesn't make sense anyways, because the whole progression of their relationship is he charms her and then ultimately sees her as completely disposable and like pimps her out to all these like guys, right? And when he's stabbing her, he's like, "You were supposed to be mine," or something, and he's like stabbing her. And then it's basically just revealed that never happened. So the film just shows you something that happened, and then says, "Oh no, that didn't actually happen. It was actually just the same thing, but the other way around," which isn't a clever twist.
No.
There's nothing clever about that. There's not like something like, if we're going for the classic unreliable narrator, something like Memento, where it shows something and then it recontextualizes it and it changes the way you see it. It's just, oh, here's something that happened. Psych, that didn't happen. This actually happened. That's not a magic trick. That's just like, look, there's nothing in the hat, and then you take the rabbit and you put it in the hat and you go, there is now. Do you know what I mean? It's just cheap shit.
And there's also the fact that it's never explained or established how on earth any of these supernatural visions are happening, which didn't annoy me so much at first, but the more I think about it, the more just like inexplicable it is. Like,
well, isn't it because she's like, Thomasin McKenzie is shown to have some kind of supernatural communication with her mother through the dead, who is dead, right? So she has some kind of ability to communicate with the dead. But
that isn't established so much as it's like a visual thing of like, oh, I see my mother, and like there's offhand lines about how she doesn't so much communicate with her, but like there's an implication of like poor mental health, and that she's recovering. She doesn't see her mum as much anymore. Like, that was a problem before, but it's still not really explained. Like, you can't just say, oh, this character has mental health issues so she can see ghosts. The Sixth Sense does a far better job of explaining that sort of shit. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think a film, it's a classic of any horror film. It's often said, a film needs to establish its rules in order to be frightening. Or same with like fantasy, sci-fi. If you're in a new world, in a new environment you don't have context for, you need to help the audience understand what are the threat levels, what's the consequence, what can our character do, versus the extent of this enemy. And instead we get very ill-defined enemy, very ill-defined abilities, ill-defined supernatural element. It just kind of happens. The coolest thing I think that happens is in one of her psychotic episodes, for want of a better word, where she's seeing the guys haunting her in like a library. She, like, in an attempt to like get them to leave her alone, gets like is it like a pair of scissors or something? She gets like a weapon and like puts it up to someone's throat, and she's stopped, and then she like sort of turns back and she realizes it's her like bitchy classmate. And I thought that
doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense, but it was at least a moment of tension and like kind of
yeah, I guess
it was a moment.
But what's the implication there thematically? Because the zombies are so thematically I'm calling them zombies. They're basically zombies. Yeah, it's like these represent something.
Yeah.
So then the bitchy classmate represents something else, but they're not you can't really draw any comparisons there. Do you know what I mean?
No.
So that scene doesn't make any sense thematically. No, thematically, completely, you're completely right. My only thing really is that, one, it was kind of, it was a moment of tension, and it was kind of gut-wrenching in so much as there was that moment, for me at least, I put myself in the character's shoes and was like, oh my god, what like a horrible, awful position to go through, like having an episode. Because if you remove the horror elements, someone had an episode and like nearly hurt someone, and that's like quite harrowing for anyone to go through. I thought the film could maybe have like expanded upon that more by having some like real consequence to it, because by the end of the film she's having like all these visions and all these things keep occurring, and she gets to the end and it's kind of like, oh okay, well now it's consequence free, that the character encounters like nothing in terms of repercussions for her actions. I thought maybe if she had, I forget, does she kill the old man? No, in fact that's another really shit part of the film. I can't believe Edgar Wright, he gets hit by a car. It's like, Edgar Wright, is this the same guy that made all these films that I love? Does the thing where a character walks into the street and just gets hit by a car?
This isn't
the character is also basically Mr. Herring, first name Red.
Yeah, he is red herring. Fuck. My God. Oh my God.
Who also
Oh
does
my
the
God.
incredibly cheesy thing of monologuing to the character in an incredibly sinister way. But
my God.
if he actually just said anything
What he
about
meant.
what he
Yeah.
meant, all of the misunderstanding would have been cleared up. And his
the
character
idea-
is ultimately completely fucking pointless. It's Terrence.
Terrence Malick. Terrence Malick. Fuck.
It's not Terrence Malick.
It's not
that would
Terrence
be
Malick.
that would be a great cameo.
Terrence Stamp.
Terrence
That's
Stamp,
it.
that's it. And he does a perfectly fine job. He looks creepy, and when he says stuff, he delivers it well. But as a character, he just makes no sense. And he just kind of monologues in an incredibly cryptic way, as to keep the plot going. Basically, that's the only reason he says it in such a weird way. And then as soon as it's revealed, he just walks out to the road and gets hit by a fucking
It's so
car.
ridiculous.
But
It's,
I don't Bulge, I'm sorry.
But no. I mean, his character. We spend much of the film thinking he is the older version of Jack.
Jack.
Who has lulled Anya Taylor-Joy's character into a false sense of security, the false promise of stardom, the classic darker flipped image of Hollywood and other industries. She ends up having to whore herself out. And so, we assume he is that character. And in fact, he is like an old policeman who gets like one scene in a flashback. And we're like, oh, it's him. Like, not really a developed character at all. Bit of throwaway stuff.
Doesn't really have any consequence on the story.
No, it's honestly there just to be like, ha, gotcha, to the audience. But my God, I hadn't even considered just how lazy that whole aspect of the story is.
I wanted to touch on the fact that the main character has so much building up. She's really the only person who feels like a fully fleshed out character. Her and Anya Taylor-Joy feels somewhat fleshed out. By the end of the film, you've kind of alluded to this, but by the end of the film, she doesn't really learn anything. Or like she hasn't sort of fundamentally changed as a character.
No. There is no arc.
She basically just like has, as the film goes on, her mental health gets worse. And there's a sort of brief thing where she's kind of idolizing Anya Taylor-Joy's character and sort of dressing like her. And then by the end of the film, she goes back to being how she was. And basically her mental health is just now a bit better because she's not having these visions. And that's really it. And it felt really strange to me because it sort of felt like Edgar Wright knew that, because he includes this kind of romance subplot with her and this guy who is basically like sort of like the only nice man in the entire film. That's kind of his role, is he's just like the only nice man. He is like the biggest caricature of just like a simp, like who's just kind of he's just there to like be nice. And like he's nice to a point where it's like kind of unbelievable how nice he is to her. Because like she is constantly freaking out. He's just like, Ellie, are you okay? Ellie, this isn't you. And it's like, oh my God, dude, find another girl. It's not worth it.
I mean, it's also that there is no other aspect to his personality. Other
that's
than
it.
He is there to follow her around and make her feel better and drag her out of whatever horrible episode she's having.
He is the weak female character that you normally have, but just a man.
Yeah, that's true. That's fucking valid. He has nothing going for him other than his relationship with our main character. I mean, like you say, at the end of the film, all the lead character is done. I guess you could argue she's learnt to like love herself. Like there's that vague element to it. But the thing is, and then at the end she's like really successful. Like she has like a fashion show that goes really well for her or something. But the thing is, the film has not really been about her and her fashion at all. She's been more of a voyeur to a secondary story than she has actually had her own story. And so shoehorning the fashion elements of it feels quite sort of facile and purely aesthetic than it carries any weight. It's not like something like Black Swan, where everything is intimately tied into her obsession with her work and her art. Obviously a far superior film to this. Fantastic film. And I can imagine this kind of a perfect version of this film that marries the intense fragility and artistic obsession of Black Swan with this weird trippy, nostalgic fever dream that this film is implementing. You know, this kind of this strange voyeurism of another time. But they don't really interlink in any way. They kind of run parallel to one another. She is just viewing something. She never actually pivots into entering into this other woman's shoes, which I thought might start happening. I thought maybe she would start becoming her, rather than it just being like, oh, I wear her clothes, or I design the clothes that she wore. Again, she's just a fucking plagiarist for a start. She's only good at fashion because she copied some shit she saw. Well, from
she
the
is
60s.
Edgar Wright. Because ultimately this film is kind of just feels like a justification for his nostalgic obsessions, because there's a kind of what feels like should be a very crucial scene very early on in the film where she meets her bitchy housemate who is similarly traumatized. They're like the same age as her, but has just like a more she's a bad person and she has like a more modern sense of fashion.
Yeah.
And I felt like, okay, this scene feels like, you know, this is going to be very relevant because it's quite a tense, actually quite a well done scene early on between the two of them, and it's quite, you know, tense, and they have this kind of friendly but standoffish energy between each other, and it feels like, okay, they're going to do something interesting with this, because she kind of just seems to be there to represent the generic kind of
the pretentious side,
the pretentious modern version of like, because this film is, you know, about nostalgia for fashion. You know, Ellie's making these like really kind of 50s style traditional dresses with these sort of like old school like couture, whatever, and like the other girl is sort of more into, I guess, like sort of urban sort of streetwear type stuff. She's wearing like Adidas and stuff, and I thought like, okay, there's going to be something more to this, and then ultimately no, not really. Basically this girl is just a kind of caricature of, you know, why, oh man, these days suck, born in the wrong generation. This film is basically just like born in the wrong generation, but like pretending it's cleverer than that when it's really not.
I think ultimately this film is a collection of a lot of potentially really interesting ideas that, if you combine them together in an intricate way, could have been super deep and intricate. Like you've got like a man justifying his nostalgia for an age when he knows there was such like deep exploitation of women in that era. That's an interesting plot to run with, that it doesn't. You've got mental health and you know, coming of age story in, you know, one of the biggest cities in the world. This complete change from country life to city life, and that weighing on your brain whilst also trying to become a success. That's also a film in of itself. You've got a murder mystery, voyeuristic psychological thriller. You've got old versus new, you know, the commentary on fashion and everything. There's so much going on, and it has fucking no idea how to link it all together. It's all just bits and pieces, a jagged mess of a film. And there's only one saving grace for it, in my opinion. One scene that really is just a beautiful, gorgeous scene early on that I could watch separately from the whole rest of the film and just be like, wow, this is what this film could have been. I know exactly what you're talking about. Our first proper introduction to Anya Taylor-Joy's character, where she waltzes in to... she goes back in time, but she's like dreaming, right? Yeah, she's dreaming of back in the 60s. She goes into this old, this like glamorous bar where I think it was Lulu's. Got Thunderball playing. Thunderball's on the cinema. Shout out to Thunderball, great film. Shout out to Thunderball. I love sharks, man. And Lulu's singing. Anya Taylor-Joy just strolls straight up to the bar and says, "I'm going to play here. Who do I need to talk to?" And the barman's like, "You talk to Jack." And then she talks to Jack, and then there's this great sort of like, you know, she's full of confidence. She's like, there's this like dance sequence they do. There's this sort of like sweeping romance to the whole thing. It's beautifully filmed. It's gorgeous sets, gorgeous costume design and everything. The performances are wonderful. The relationship that is formed in an instant between Matt Smith and Anya Taylor-Joy is electric. It's just so well done, and it's just fucking gone. It's just like, there's your moment in the sun. There you go. That's what this film could have been. I think ultimately the reason that scene works is because at the end of the day, it just feels like all that Edgar Wright really cares about is emulating nostalgia.
right?
Right.
In this film, at least. All that he's really interested in is that he thinks the 60s were fucking cool. And I think that's fine. You could make a film about how the 60s were cool and add like a dark element to it. But the film's like tripping over itself to overcomplicate that. And yeah, that scene is like, yeah, it's like you said, it's electric. Like it's got so much energy to it. And this was the point in the film where I was like, you know, this film's been pretty good so far. And it's really like the last moment of the film. And I'd just like to contrast that moment in the film with what I think is the worst moment of the film. This pretty much just sums up everything. I don't really have much more to say about this film after this, but basically the ending of the film, the finale of the film, is like one of the worst things I've seen all year. And you know, I've seen some pretty bad stuff. I've seen some bad finales. You know, I just watched Shang-Chi the other day. This is worse than that. The scene where
Free Guy.
You've seen Free Guy, yeah. I don't know if it's worse than that.
The ending of this film is worse than anything in that film.
Yeah,
but
sure.
That film is worse than this film.
So,
just
like,
to clarify.
There's a plot twist that basically the landlady that she's been staying with is actually Anya Taylor-Joy, but old, and Diana Rigg is basically that she is Anya Taylor-Joy. And the way this is delivered, you know, Ellie's finally sort of figured out what she needs to do. She needs to leave, and basically she quickly sits down for a cup of tea with her, and she's like, oh yeah, I've got to leave. And turns out Diana Rigg's like onto her. She's figured out what's going on. She's poisoned her tea. She has moments to live. Then our friend, I can't remember the guy, the romance character bloke comes in, and then kind of foils her plan, and then a fire gets started, and then there's this kind of bizarre kind of thing where Ellie's like, she's dying from the poison, and then she's going up the stairs and the house is burning.
She's having like visions and stuff.
She's having visions, and then you get to the top of the stairs into the room where all the visions happen, and then there's this, this fight, and then all the demons come out, and that's where you get that really cringy "help me" bit that I referenced earlier. It's just a complete fucking mess. I mean, there's so many elements of it that don't work. Like the poison that she gets poisoned with ends up becoming completely irrelevant. Like, as in, like, it's impeding her movement, and then the film just seems to forget that she's poisoned because it's never addressed again, even though it seems to be like a really, like, oh my god, she's gonna die. It just like, forget about it. It doesn't matter. Yeah,
she doesn't even like pass out from it or anything. Like, it's supposed to like at the very least knock her out or something, but she just kind of carries on as normal.
And then like the fire is like so inconsistent. Like the bottom of the house catches fire, and then like as she goes up the stairs, like the upstairs is really on fire, but then she obviously has to go back down the stairs, and then as she goes back down the stairs, the house is like less on fire. That's not how fire works. It's so like poorly made. I couldn't believe what I was watching. And then there's just this scene where like basically Diana Rigg is just explaining the plot, and it just goes on. It just goes on and on. It's just these shots of her face, and she's just explaining stuff out loud. And it's just like, I can't believe this is made by Edgar Wright. My god, it was unbearable, and like the film already felt too long at this point. But like, I could not wait to leave. But like when this was happening, I was like, I'm done with this fucking film.
It's such an ugly scene as well. The CGI is fucking terrible in it. Like, it's so CGI fire is notoriously difficult to get right. But man, it's just not only is it's horribly written, exposition riddled, poorly choreographed. Like the whole, like, they go up the stairs, they go down the stairs, like blah 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 blah. Like, it just kind of it has this weird geography.
It's not exciting.
It doesn't really make sense. Like the characters just kind of mill around. Like there's not particularly a reason for. I don't know. It just feels. It lacks intensity for such like a crucial moment of the film. They just kind of wander through the house, like sort of crawling from place to place. And it's consequence free at the end. It's just like, oh yeah, old woman died. You're free to go. No questions asked, milady. Please continue on with your fashion career.
Your degree. Yeah.
That's it. And that's that.
What would
you
rate it, Adam?
Oh, it's a big fat 3 out of 10. Honestly, it could be lower, but I'm giving it something of the benefit of the doubt for the first sort of 30-40 minutes of, but like, well made and occasionally fantastic filmmaking that then takes a nosedive into complete and utter absurdity.
Yeah, I agree.
What would you give it?
I think the film is, for the most part, it looks really good. Obviously, there are some really big exceptions. But like when it looks good, it really looks good. Like really looks good, and it has. You can tell that it's directed with like real precision at points because there's like some really clever stuff with sound. with like there's a bit with like a vinyl skipping that's like really crucial, and like it's got these like crazy cameras. Like the effort has been put in here. It's not like he wasn't trying when it comes to the directing. And I do think that generally speaking, the performances are strong, with a few exceptions here and there, like for the most part. And I think Thomasin McKenzie deserves a fucking medal, because I don't think she comes off great from the film, but I really think that like she tried. She really tried.
Yeah.
She had a really difficult task with this film, because it was asking so much of her, like I said, and I just feel really bad for her, because like I just imagine like how difficult it must have been for her to like communicate this communicate her character in a way that didn't feel completely grating, because the character is completely grating by the time you're like an hour and a half into the film. So yeah, there are strong elements to it, but yeah, I completely agree with you. 3 out of 10, basically. The film doesn't really succeed in any meaningful way. It's not scary. It's also not very funny, and
it's not very entertaining.
It's not very entertaining. Yeah, the really upbeat, energetic directing just really doesn't allow for much. The directing that Edgar Wright's famous for just doesn't really allow for much horror or suspense. It's too fast moving, and this film just completely folds in on itself, basically. And I don't have any intention of watching this again anytime soon.
No. I mean, I hope you're wrong on so much as that your theory.
Oh, I hope I'm wrong too. Yeah.
Like I like, in terms of your theory on like Edgar Wright, maybe he's only capable of making films in this style, in so much as his specific kind of camera work and quick cutting and stuff like that. Obviously that's something that I've loved about his previous work, and makes it so thrilling and fast-paced and intricate and exciting.
Yeah, it works there.
But I hope that he is able to show a greater range of styles in future films. I really had such high hopes for this film, and it's just an impressive failure on so many levels. And with that, we come on to the final film for tonight, Lady Vengeance by Park Chan-wook. This is the sort of final part of his Vengeance trilogy, featuring absolute bangers like Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance and, of course, Oldboy, which is still probably... it's probably been supplanted by Parasite as the most famous South Korean movie in the Western world. But still, an absolute classic that is deservedly celebrated and has been for decades. So Lady Vengeance is kind of the less talked about, final part, spiritual, I should say. It's the stories don't link together in any way other than just sort of thematically. But this film follows Lee Gum-ja, who is a woman who's arrested for supposedly kidnapping and murdering a child, and then goes to jail for 13 years. And this shows us her coming out of jail and trying to reap revenge on the people that put her there. It's absolutely bizarrely paced and directed. It's so eclectic and vibrant. It's quite difficult to follow for much of the sort of first 2/3, I would say, but still incredibly intriguing, enrapturing. It's just Park Chan-wook is so stylish, and this kind of had me waiting on bated breath, regardless of whether I could follow it or not. So Rupert, I'm going to pass this to you. What do you think of Lady Vengeance?
Pretty much agree with everything you said, because Park Chan-wook is one of my all-time favourite directors. I've seen pretty much everything he's done. He was my introduction to Korean cinema. Like you said, Oldboy is pretty much like the first big crossover Korean success that we've had, I think, maybe ever. I think it was like the first big mainstream film that Western audiences actually kind of heard of and at least watched a little bit, not in the same capacity they did for Parasite, as you said. But yeah, I love everything about him. But if there is a criticism that I would have of him as a director, is that sometimes his style can kind of smother a film's sort of crucial information, and this film is probably the worst example of it. But the way he does the kind of, as you said, eclectic directing with this film is kind of like, it kind of exists in this magical reality where things will just kind of not make sense, and the film just kind of rolls with it. So like you'll have moments where people are dreaming and they're also interacting within the dream but acknowledging that it's not happening, or someone will have someone else's vision, and then the narrator will say something like, well, it's good that the main character didn't have this vision because they'd be really upset if they saw this. Which I thought was quite funny.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I remember that.
Which, like, and like, you know, there will be like abstractions that just seem to happen that the characters just don't really acknowledge. Like, there's an early scene in a prison where someone is just kind of glowing in a heavenly way, and it's just kind of there, and no one really acknowledges it. So definitely, especially with the film, I think the crucial flaw in this film, I do actually really like this film, so I don't know why I'm sounding so negative, but the crucial flaw of this film is, particularly in the sort of the first leg of the film, that the plotting is actually very intricate and requires a good amount of explaining, and the film is quite reticent to actually sit down and explain what's going on, or have a sort of a clear sequence of events in a way that would be sort of, I guess, more digestible. But even with that, it's just kind of a lot of fun to watch. And I do really like this film. It's probably the weakest of the trilogy, as I said, but it really, once it ramps up, it gets pretty extreme. And I think visually, I mean, this guy never misses. This film is like absolutely gorgeous, and there are some like really iconic shots in this, some really beautifully framed sequences, and
there
the
is some
editing
insane
just
camera work.
Some of the editing adds to it like in a crazy way. I love this film, and I think the acting is also pretty excellent, with one exception. But yeah, I loved it. I've seen it before though. What did you think of it, Adam?
I was baffled for a long time by it. I was kind of waiting for the pieces to click together because I suspected they would. I don't like Park Chan-wook, for as stylish as he is, he's not particularly abstract. So I was thinking, okay, I can't follow it now, but I will be able to follow it in a few minutes. I was just kind of waiting, when will the penny drop? When will it finally kind of smooth out and even out? And then there is this kind of extended period towards the end, this like final act, where things are much more concrete, everything is defined for you, everything slows down, and that's, by that point, the pieces have all come together. In some way, I guess with revenge films, Korean revenge being such like a sort of big part of their action movie market and their thriller market, often draws comparison to Westerners, to people like Quentin Tarantino, who's taken so much influence from Asian cinema at the very least. This film definitely had a whiff of Kill Bill to it. I don't know if that's direct, it's more just sort of a parallel I'm drawing. This kind of, like a ramshackle collection of criminals and things like that. It's not a perfect match, of course.
No, yeah, it kind of makes... I don't know, didn't they come out around the same time though?
No, Kill Bill was earlier. It's like 2001 or something, and this is 2005. Yeah, just that, like a woman who has been wronged by a man who is I don't know if we want to dive.
Yeah, that's kind of a spoiler already.
Yeah. I'm. I'll try and explain it in more general terms. I love a lot of the stuff. They do a lot of flashbacks to her time in prison, and she's doing all there's this really conflicting narrative around what her character is like. There's all these people saying, oh, she was an angel, she was so she did all these amazing things, and they'll have these really silly scenes of her doing something so preposterously nice for someone that it has to be fake. It seems kind of unreliable narrator-ish in glamorizing this person to an extent where they could possibly never have been that good of a person. And then it kind of is recontextualized where we then cut to her present day, and she's being like really cold, standoffish, and like anyone that like she liked before, she's like, go fuck yourself. That was an act, essentially. I mean, it's not that clean cut.
Well, that is basically the introduction to the film, though, right?
Yeah. I like how there's no like 5 years earlier, it cuts back to her time in prison. The film would just sort of jarringly cut time sequences to different points, and you as the audience just have to work out what the fuck's going on. And it does slot into place. but it hurts the brain a little bit, I'll be real.
Yeah, no, it is kind of difficult to follow. Particularly, although really, I think it becomes pretty simple by the time you. There's kind of quite a pivotal scene in the middle, and after that, it all kind of works. But yeah, I think the way the film's presented sort of ties it over, because I think I'd kind of lose patience with something like this if it wasn't so entertainingly presented. And the film does have kind of this comic book style to it, very very similarly to Oldboy, which is obviously literally based on a comic. I don't think they say this is, but it has this kind of comic book style to it where everything's sort of quite over the top. It's basically like a melodrama with these like really kind of cartoonish characters, and it will be like snapping around, and it's very energetic. But then what I like is as the film goes on, and as you learn more about the character and what she's been through, and about these other characters and what they've done, the film becomes more keen to linger on moments, whereas previously it's kind of very briskly, as we were saying, sort of going through this stuff in a way that can be quite confusing. As the film goes on, particularly with scenes that involve sex or violence, it becomes much more willing to like linger, like almost uncomfortably long on some moments.
For sure.
Which I really enjoyed.
Yeah, it was difficult watching this with my mum, I'll be honest.
Oh, bro! Oh, God, that's a terrible...
Yeah.
I should have...
Yeah, I just had it on, and mum has sat in on a few films with me, just like... She has, like, a general interest. She has very broad taste, and I admire her for it. She'll sit and watch anything. It does mean she enjoys a lot of trash, but, she was encouraged... As a tangent, she was really encouraging me to watch Last Christmas with Emilia Clarke in it. And she was like, oh, it's so great. And I saw like the last 20 minutes of it because I just came in when it was on. Holy shit. Fuck me, never watched that film, man. That's a big tangent. Actually, I do want to just say this because it was bugging me when I was watching that film. That film is literally the meme where the boy... where the girl is... If you remember that old really shitty meme from like 2008, which was like, oh... good luck with your heart surgery, and then the boy she gets out of the heart surgery, and the boy isn't texting her, and she's like, why doesn't he love me? And then she's like, the doctor's like, who do you think gave you the heart? And she's like crying. That's literally that film. That film is literally like, you know the line of the song Last Christmas I gave you my heart.
Oh, I heard about this film.
Literally happens. Like, she has a relationship with a man who is like a ghost of the person that gave her a heart for a heart transplant.
That's amazing. I hope they play the song.
It's fucked. It's so stupid. And my parents were like, oh, it's actually really sweet and really well written. I'm like, you're fucking having a giggle. Anyway.
Well, this is a different Christmas film, yeah. Yeah,
this is a very different kind of Christmas film. The sex scenes are so unpleasant in this. The one that really particularly gets me is one in the prison. Without spoiling too much about like the importance of the character, there's like the one sort of psychotic bully in their prison cell, which is really interesting, like weird prison dynamic. I'm not familiar with Korean jails, as I'm sure many of you aren't, and they seem to have this weird shared living quarters where like 6 or even more women are all living together, and they sleep on the floor and stuff like that. There's no like bedding or whatever, and the one woman in the room seemed to be like really commanding and psycho, and she was getting another lady to perform sexual favors on her, and they linger on that for so long, like just her face, just like her like pleasure in like,
it's pretty grim, yeah.
It's so grim. It's really, really unsettling. But then, in the background, you see another character scheming away, and things come to a head later on where that character gets what they deserve, and it's
pretty
beautiful.
Insane. Yeah.
And I think that's the importance of scenes like that. Some people would call that sort of stuff gratuitous, but what's important about it is that gratuity lends weight to the consequences that they then receive. You have to hammer home to the audience just how awful these people are. They've done this awful thing in the past, but are they still awful people? Well, yes, they are, and this is how we've shown it. One of our main villains, well, the main villain rather, basically rapes his partner at one point. It's like that dinner scene.
Well, it's like, is it? It's like really hard to tell, right? But that's why that
like
scene is so effective.
It's like horrible sexual aggression. Like, even if it's not rape, it's like it's this cold, heartless, ruthless,
it's very strange,
animalistic kind of sex scene where it's almost like a business transaction. Like, he just gets up and it happens,
and then he sits back down and he finishes dinner.
Yeah, it's like frightening. Played by our man Choi min-sik, who, you know, a legend for, you know, his roles in Old Boy and amazing in I Saw the Devil as well.
Did you also notice the cameo by Song Kang-ho?
I did. That
was great. I loved how brief his cameo was without spoiling anything.
I was like, holy shit, he's here. And he's not anymore.
I think we have to go into spoilers. I don't think we can go any
we're
further.
dancing around it. We both recommend this film. Yeah. If you're you know, a lot of people have been introduced to South Korean cinema recently through Parasite and now, of course, Squid Game. So, you know, if either of those two things have grabbed your fancy, we recommend not only this but basically everything that Park Chan-wook has done. So Rupert, what do you want to talk about? What sort of spoilers we get?
The interesting, so basically, eventually the film kind of reveals that she didn't actually murder this kid. What happened was she got pregnant and then while she was at school when she was very young, and then needed somewhere to live, and then went to live with this teacher that she used to flirt with, I guess, or this teacher used to flirt with her when she was underage. I don't think it was his kid. I think it was like someone else's, basically. She went to live with him, and then while living with him, this guy had a habit of wanting to kidnap children to ransom them to their parents, and basically ended up killing this boy. After this happened, and she had her baby, he then basically said, I'm going to kill your baby unless you confess to this crime. And if you confess to the crime, then your kid will go up for adoption and it will live. So he could get away with it, basically. So basically, like the worst kind of person you could even imagine. As the film goes on, there's also like this other stuff that comes out around him where you sort of basically find out that he basically just had a habit of doing this, where he had done it multiple times, where he just kind of he has like this weird hatred of children, and had done it multiple times where he was going to ransom them, but basically as an act of sadism would film the children basically begging for their parents to come and save them, kill the child, and then use that tape to then get the parents to send the money, thinking that their kid was still alive. So, and then the film kind of reckons with revenge in an incredibly direct and kind of almost in this sort of fantastical situation, that you imagine that if something like this had happened to you, the parents of the children who have been murdered almost put in this kind of like, imagine if this happened type situation that would almost never really happen in real life, where they're basically just he is captured and they are given the freedom to do whatever they want to him. It's that kind of, it's like a very strange, because whereas like in Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, it's all kind of this like the way revenge is treated is like very subtle, and it's all these sort of tragedy of errors.
It's very gritty and very real.
And then like in Old Boy, it's this huge twist reveal that kind of explains things and makes the revenge like this sort of grand scheme. Whereas in this, the way it's dealt with is quite interesting, because you essentially take all these characters who've been wronged, and then they're basically just said, now you can take your revenge, basically, and that's also her revenge because he has also wronged her. So I just think that like, even with the sloppiness in setting up, getting to that moment is just like a very, I've just never seen a film deal with something like this in that way. That's what I kind of appreciate about Park Chan-wook in particular, but also like a lot of Korean cinema for going to these kind of extremes and presenting it in a way that it's just not really like anything else. Yeah.
No, I loved that ending. I think what a lot of Korean revenge films do is they show the extremity of revenge and the desire and that sort of bloodlust that comes in people, and often they explore it to its logical conclusion. Someone gets what they want, and the character ultimately dies or whatever. But then often the case is their redemption doesn't come. You know, they feel like that will bring them peace, and it doesn't. And I think this film deals with that in a really interesting way as well, by making everyone get in on it, where she's not even the person that gets like the final kill on him. Like, he's not like her victim per se. She's just orchestrated. It's almost like a fucking saw trap, for Christ's sake. It's, you know, a man is tied to a chair and they take turns stabbing him. It's like, my mum compared it to Murder on the Orient Express, the Poirot story. Right. Yeah. In so much as spoilers for fucking Poirot, mate. They all did it. So sorry if you are just about to get reading some Agatha Christie, but yeah, this interesting thing of wrestling with culpability and that desire. So often it's something you will see in the news stories and or like general outrage at like child deaths and things like that. Like, you wish like you could. The public wishes that they could get revenge on these people. Their blood boils. They put themselves in their shoes, and the parents of the situation are like, "Oh my god, mortified and probably wish for similar things." And this is that kind of wish fulfillment. Like, what happens if you're really put into that situation? And they're kind of somewhat sated by it to an extent. I respect how varied the responses from different people, you know. Yeah. Some people are very cold about it, some people are very nervous about it, other people are just straight up barbaric and ruthless, and they're just like, they have the bit I love is where the
guy runs in with the axe, and then the woman goes, "Wait, there's still people after us."
Yeah, he's just gonna he's gonna cut his head off, and then she's like,
"So be polite, there's other torturing to go on."
Yeah, I like the final one is just really efficient. She doesn't waste any time. She just puts a pair of scissors in the back of his neck. But I like how it affects our main character, because she then has this interaction with the ghost of Wonwo, I think is the the kid, and
who was murdered.
The kid who was murdered, where a previous character, her daughter, in fact, has... We've kind of jumped ahead a bit here, so don't worry. We will get back to some more of the core story. But her daughter sees him in passing, like this ghostly image, and she doesn't really realise what she's seen. She just falls back asleep. And then it comes back for Gumja, and she's like kind of elated to see him briefly. She's like, "Oh my god, you finally appeared to me." And she's trying to explain herself, and he just puts like a thing in her mouth, like a gag, which is what she did to Choi Min-sik's character, as if to say, you know, you are as guilty as he is. You know, you're not absolved of your crimes just for killing him. And it leaves, because it's a silent gesture, and then the character just leaves, and there's no punishment eked out on her other than her own psychological torment. It leaves a lot of questions for the viewer as to like, what exactly does this mean for her and for her? Does it mean that she is as bad as him and that she deserves the same treatment? You know, she deserves what she dealt out to him, in so much as putting the gag in her mouth, likening her to him? Or is it saying that, you know, in committing this heinous act against a murderer, you are no better than the murderer? I think there's questions it opens up.
I like how the film takes it from the parents' perspective, though, because, like you said, there's kind of a varied response by them, but the film doesn't feel particularly judgmental of them.
No, surprisingly so, actually.
Yeah, because I feel like it would be quite caricaturish and kind of, I don't know, just not interesting if the film painted them all as completely righteous for doing it, or all as sort of completely sort of idiots for what they do, because they all basically end up, you know, torturing him. I guess basically the film almost doesn't really have its mind made up on whether it's right or wrong, and I think the film really needs to have its mind made up on whether that's right or wrong, because it's not really there to hand out the answers.
No.
And you know, there's moments where like there are like two characters who are like, "Oh well, should we torture him? Like, we're not gonna feel any better after this." And then like the guy says, "Nobody's a perfect person." Then they're like, "All right, fuck this guy. We're gonna stab him a little bit." Which I thought was like, because the film isn't saying like that visceral reaction you have when, you know, you see something horrible that's happened, and you have that urge to avenge it in some way. It's not saying that is wrong, because to me that would feel kind of, it just doesn't feel right to say that urge is just inherently wrong. It feels like you're kind of dismissing so many sort of emotional factors about human beings if you just sort of say, no, revenge is just sort of blanketly wrong, and nothing good can ever come of it. That doesn't feel real to me. But it also, obviously, like with a lot of these revenge films, it is also, completely willing to point out that, do you really gain anything from this meaningfully? And it kind of does land somewhere in the middle ground, I think, where it sort of says that, at the end of the day, this film doesn't really feel like a complete exercise in misery. It feels like, there was some catharsis to be had there in a way, and there was almost like a wrong that was somewhat righted, but things are still irreparably different. And I guess the question is like, is what our main character does ultimately gonna help her? Because she kind of takes it upon herself to be the dealer of justice, to right her wrongs, and it clearly, the end of the film, basically the last point of the film is that she like puts her face in a cake and is like sort of weeping as she does it in this kind of comedic way. It's
like comedic and very harrowing at the same time, because it's established earlier on that like upon leaving prison, it's tradition to be presented with tofu as a means of representing one's turning away from a life of sin and embracing purity. And so the white tofu,
because tofu is fucking bland.
It's and she rejects it at the beginning of the film, and then at the end of the film does she present it to her daughter, or does her daughter present it to her?
Her daughter presents it to her. It's like, I think, I can't remember what it is, but it's like, it's not tofu, it's like cake. It's the same symbolism. And initially she rejects it, and she's like, the daughter should eat it first. And she takes like she digs her finger into it and has some, and then like in a moment of just like sheer sadness and desperation for some level of internal personal redemption, she just buries her face into it, like eager for some kind of respite, I guess, from her own psychological self-torture. And I guess she tries to reach out, she tries to connect with her daughter, because earlier in the film she does reveal, about midway, pretty much bang on midway, she reveals she has this daughter. And when the daughter is introduced, there is this distance between them, not least because there's a language barrier, because the daughter has gone to live in Australia and she's largely only speaks English. And she doesn't really seem to make much of an effort to connect with her daughter, in so much as she's more there as something she's reclaimed rather than something that she loves or connects with. At the end of the film, there's a sort of change of heart from the daughter and from the mother as to like their connection to one another. And I think that's an important visual kind of representation of that cake, that the innocence of youth. She is innocently giving this thing to her mother, and I think that like breaks her down. I think it's a really beautiful way to end the film. I didn't find it funny in any particular way. I found it quite tragic, but it has. What I mean is like the pure image of it is kind of like inherently kind of comedic, but like the film sort of does this a few times, and I think it's actually a strength of really good Korean films I've seen in general. Everybody talks about how Parasite, for example, is able to straddle different sort of genres and moods, and this film does it as well. Like, one of my favourite scenes in the film is a scene that is inherently kind of absurd and almost comedic because of it, where she has the main bad guy, who is a primary school teacher who teaches kids English, so he speaks English as well. She has a gun to his head and is forcing him to translate for her, as she kind of explains herself to her daughter and like apologizes to her. And like the situation at first is kind of funny, because like she's using this guy as like her conduit, as a conduit to her daughter, to establish her sort of true feelings of love for her daughter, who she really doesn't really know, and sort of apologize for like her failures as a mother. The way the scene is framed is also really interesting, because it starts off real and then like the background fades out and it's like just her kind of cut out on this background, and then like the daughter is like superimposed as well. It's like a really sort of abstract, almost kind of strange scene where the setting of the scene, even normally, is so awkward and kind of funny, but then the actual emotion of the scene is like very real. I just think this kind of stuff happens, that these kind of things happen in the film, and I think the film is like one of the best strengths of it is kind of managing to vary between these like really dark and like gritty and horribly violent and tragic things, but also having like a weird sense of like humor, like really dark sense of fun to it as well.
Yeah, you know what? I had kind of forgotten that scene, and I guess I would slightly backtrack my point previously about her not connecting with her daughter before. I guess I would amend that and say the final scene is more her that there finally being a kind of mutual connection between the two that she embraces. I really like.
Your original point still works, because I mean, she never in the film, she never really connects with her daughter in a. I mean, she does, like, kind of, but like
she attempts to, but there's a certain like
there's like the implication at the end of the film to me is that, like, you know, it's never going to be a normal mother-daughter relationship, you know.
Yeah, but I do really like the scene you're talking about. Like, I think that it there's a strange beauty in it, even though there is that absolute absurdity to to getting the murderer to read out the dialogue. I think that's really. It's not something I'd considered before. Like,
and it's a great performance moment as well. Just like,
yeah.
I don't know the name of the actress, but it's just a great, because obviously it's all sort of one shot of just, you know, the camera panning in on her face, and you know, she does a great job. She does a great job throughout the whole film, actually.
It's Lee Young-ai.
Okay, right. The only performance in the film I didn't really like overall was the daughter, who is a bit of a mixed bag as an actor. I mean, she's quite young.
Yeah, but she was quite just sort of bratty and annoying, and I didn't hate that. There were some really jarring scenes. I mean, there's jarring edits and cuts.
Jarring is the name of the game here. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, like I was saying before, you know, we have this sort of, it calms down in the second half, or the last third, where we're dealing with all of the moral quandaries of whether they should or shouldn't torture this guy, and then they finally decide to. And so there's this long drawn out piece, which is a very satisfying way to end the film off. It feels very cathartic, and it's such a lovely change of pace from the chaos of what's going on previously. But we have like really quick, aggressively fast pacing in the first part, and when she goes to Australia to meet her daughter, there's this really weird scene. She goes to talk to the parents. They go, "We need a drink." Then they're like hysterically laughing in the next room and getting pissed. And the dialogue is weird. I don't know if it's because it's like slightly poorly translated, or not so much poorly translated, but like they're speaking in such a way that, you know, English-speaking people would never really talk. Like, they're saying the right words, but in ways that just feel unnatural. But again, that could just be a stylistic choice, because it's so frenzied. They're all like, they seem psychotic. I don't really know what's going on there. Like,
it's very awkward, that portion of the film. Yeah,
then
they don't seem like Australian people.
Yeah, and then they go to bed. She's like sleeping in the bed with her daughter, and her daughter gets up and is like, "I want to go to South Korea. Take me to Seoul." And she's like, "No, fuck off. I ain't taking you to South Korea." And then immediately cuts to the daughter holding a knife to her neck, and everyone in this weird, like, still shot of, like, holding their mouths in absolute horror. And then I was like, "Oh yeah, now we're on a plane to Korea. Cool." Like, what the fuck happened?
It's very
there?
awkward.
Like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
It was so weird.
Very strange. Very strange. I think I don't know what it is with the daughter. I mean, I don't think she was. There were scenes where she was quite good. But I just think there were also like just quite a lot of awkward line deliveries from her, and I don't know if it was just like like a language thing. I don't know if Park Chan-wook speaks English, or like he was, you know, as able to tell what was a good take from her or something. I don't know, or maybe he just liked it that way.
There's kind of a funny scene as well linked to that, where the girl is looking up at the sky and it says, "You have no mother" in the clouds, and then she's like lying upside down in the tree, and she turns her head and looks and sees a taxi approaching, and her mum gets out of it, and then she looks back at the clouds and it says, "You have mother." And I just thought that was like, again, it could just be knowing. It could, I can't tell, but
I thought that was a joke.
Yeah, it's the kind
of
goofy thing that seems deliberate. I did find it amusing, regardless of what reason it is for it. It is just a funny little bit. Like, why is she out in the middle of the desert?
Yeah.
Why did they? How did they take a taxi out to exactly that point as well? All of it is so absurd.
I mean,
I don't know.
Given that there's a dream sequence in this where min-sik choi is a dog in a cage and she just leads him to the edge of a cliff and then shoots him in the head. I mean,
yes.
Why not? Why not?
Yeah,
that's kind of, that's what I like about like these kind of films, is that like it's not afraid to just kind of do something that
just go off the rails with it.
Just like just do it for the cool piece of imagery. And just have it there. I think that, and there's enough substance to it to back it up as well. Obviously, if you just had loads of random shit, it would be annoying. But I think that this is still like quite a good story. It maybe not the most effectively told, but it has like a real flair to it. As far as like a director's voice goes, Park Chan-wook is like still, of like the modern directors, but like easily amongst my favourites. Yeah. Even if this is the weakest in the trilogy.
Yeah. I mean, I really like the stuff where it flashes back to the prison, where she's kind of like essentially recruiting women to her cause. She's been plotting from the moment she got in. Again, it's kind of this is what kind of gave me the Kill Bill impressions. Because it's this like long-standing plan where she goes from like person to person, rather than in Kill Bill where she's obviously like killing people to get to the top. In this, she's like recruiting people to help her get to the man on top. He's not on the top of an organization, but she just needs to get close to him and get access to him. And that's why she appears as this angel in like flashbacks. As you alluded to earlier, there's like a bit where she's literally glowing that she's got like a halo. But then the character that I mentioned earlier as well, the abusive bully in the women's prison who gets another woman to give her oral sex against her will. Gumja feeds her bleach while she's sick and like slowly kills her over the course of 3 years. It's so fucking brutal, but it's so satisfying.
It's excellent.
Because the character is so inherently evil. Like she killed and ate her husband
and lover, on a barbecue.
And lover, just Jesus Christ.
That's a great flashback. I love that as like a quick insert where it's just her eating the barbecue. It's just a
As the police
cartoonish.
Approach the house. Well, that's where so much of the comic book aesthetic stuff really comes in, is that the quick cutting aggressive stuff happening at the beginning, where it's just like bang bang flashback. Oh, where are we now? Oh, I don't know what's going on. I don't know who the fuck is supposed to be narrating this as well. What's going on with that?
That was confusing. That was confusing as to what that was. I think the implication towards the end is that it might be the daughter when she's older.
Oh, maybe.
But it's hard to say. I can't remember what line it was that gave me that thought. There was something towards the end that I think kind of hints that. But I think the narration is also just kind of there because I was rather it wasn't there, but it kind of has to be there because it's kind of sellotaping over the issue of the fact that it's really difficult to follow.
Yes.
And it doesn't actually make it much easier to follow for the most part.
No, I'm not sure it does. It gives you something to grab a hold of when you're like treading water in these this murky plot about God knows what, because you really don't know what's going on at all for so long. There's a character at the beginning who's this like Christian preacher who seems really important to the whole thing. He's like the first male character we see. He greets her out after she comes out of prison, and he's had some like influence in her rehabilitation, or the act of her rehabilitation, I should say. And then a little later in the film, he hands a photo to the villain and then is never seen again. It turns out he was incredibly inconsequential.
Yeah, it was strange because they do place a lot of emphasis on him.
I guess inconsequential is harsh. He does play some part, but it's weird how that
about
character,
revenge.
Yeah, that character's just kind of gone. He's never talked about or seen again. It's really strange.
Lord Farquaad, that's what he looks like. Korean Lord Farquaad, but Christian.
Completely. Yeah, that is it. That's it.
I do love that line. He says something like, "Oh, Jesus wouldn't approve," and she says, "I'm Buddhist now."
Yes, yeah, that's great. Okay, so Rupert, what would you rate Lady Vengeance?
I would give it a sort of a strong 7, sort of nearing an 8, but I'll give it a 7. I think it's really just kind of exciting film to watch, because I think it says a lot that even though it's difficult to grab a hold of the plot, particularly in the sort of first hour or so, it's so engaging anyways, because I feel like it really speaks to the strength of the presentation and the performances and the interesting themes and questions that it poses, and just to kind of, it just has a real sense of, even for like how dark it is, like a real sense of like life and fun to it, in the way it's presented, that carries it, and I think it gets better as it goes on. And then, there are a couple elements here that I think aren't as strong. I don't think that the daughter character is a particularly great performance, but everything builds to a really satisfying sort of third act, and there's a real sense of emotion to it as well. Even if it, if you were to ask me like which of the Revenge trilogy is the best, it probably still goes Old Boy, Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, and then this, but they're all worth watching. So and I can see that if someone said to me that this was their favourite, I could totally get why, because this film has, it's not really that similar to either of the other two. So
no, it's very different, in fact.
Yeah. So yeah, 7 out of 10. What about you?
I'm with you again. Yeah, 7 out of 10. We have gone 3 for 3 this week. We are
yeah, baby.
Absolutely following each other note for note, and it's beautiful. I love it. Yeah, talking more about just how different this film is stylistically, I think that I really appreciate that about this trilogy, is each film has something so distinctly different to offer. I guess in complete contrast with what we were saying about Edgar Wright with Last Night in Soho, it feels like Park Chan-wook has such an ease of which he can sort of adapt to new styles. He's really, adept at broadening his influences, and it's just a completely captivating series of films, not just this one film. I cannot stress enough to anyone listening to this, please watch all 3 of Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, Old Boy, and Lady Vengeance. They all make very interesting companion pieces to one another, and they discuss revenge in very different ways separately. But this film, captivating, bizarre, super like high energy and energetic. There's some amazing and bizarre scene transitions we didn't really talk about. There's one where she's just like, they're just watching her go into a building, and then they clearly CGI some effect on like the window, so they like pan the camera up and into the room and then turn it
goes
around
through the glass.
It's so unnecessary for such an ordinary shot, but I love that they went for that effort. And then there's a bit where they're watching like that a scene is playing out, and then someone opens a door and the scene is on the door, and then as they open it, it like follows it and then like disappears. Like, what the fuck? Why did you do that? But I love that he did it. It makes no particular sense. It's just a man going, I'm going to do whatever the fuck I like. Yeah. And I think
he does it well. That's what matters, right?
Yeah, exactly. This film has a chaotic energy to it that's very intoxicating. It's not perfect by any means. I think it could have done with being a bit more streamlined and a little less convoluted in not so much the plot, but in the way the plot is explained to the audience. But that said, I think it's a film that will give a lot more to me maybe on a second watch, because once you have the answers, I think it'll be a lot more fun to pick apart the journey that we take there. I don't know if this film would be as captivating if we got it in a straight chronological line, so I can understand the choice to go non-linear with it. I think just maybe he went a little too crazy with the editing on that side of things. But yeah,
I think so, yeah.
It's a 7 out of 10 from me. It's a 7 out of 10 from Rupert. Last Night in Soho is a 3 out of 10 from me and a 3 out of 10 from Rupert. And Dune is an 8 out of 10 from me and an 8 out of 10 for Rupert. Oh mate, we're jinxes for it. It's unbelievable. So that brings us to the end of our 12th podcast, our first 3-film podcast. It's been an absolute haul of films, and we hope that you have enjoyed our conversations about them. If you're intrigued to check these films out, or if you're big fans of any of these films, let us know in the comments. If you're watching this on YouTube, and if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Music, be sure to give us a little cheeky follow. Leave us a review if you're on Apple. That would be greatly appreciated. If you're on YouTube, like, subscribe, all the good stuff. We will be back shortly with podcast 13. But before we wrap up, Rupert, what is the film we're going to be watching next time?
It's going to be out in January, so I haven't actually thought of this in advance. So I'm just trying to think of like what's the most January film, and I think I've settled on it. I'm going to recommend, and I hate to do this, but I think I'm going to break the Asian cinema thing we've been doing.
That's all right.
I'm going to go for Manchester by the Sea, a film I've only seen once, because I don't like January. I don't think anybody really likes January. And I think we should
so we're going miserable.
Yeah, miserable and set somewhere cold. So
okay.
Manchester by the Sea, the film that won Casey Affleck Best Actor at the Oscars. Saw it in the cinema and loved it, so I'm interested to see if it holds up or if I like it even more. It's one of those films that I saw once and I never stopped really thinking about it, so I'm intrigued. So it's January, let's get sad, you know?
Wow, okay. That's a film I've been wanting to watch for a while. I remember really wanting to watch it at the time, and then it's just kind of slipped out of the conversave.
Yeah, it had hype at the time, but I think I might like it more than I liked it the first time, because I've rewatched some scenes of it, and I've read like a bunch of stuff on it, and I've seen other films by the director. So yeah, I'm interested to dip back into it and see what I think about it this time, and because I feel like going into it for a second time might really change how you watch the film. So yeah, I'm intrigued.
Interesting. Okay, well, we hope that if you're looking forward to getting miserable with us in January, you'll check out Manchester by the Sea if you want to be clued up ahead of time, and if not,
I think it's on Prime. So
yeah. Join us again for the ride if not, we would love your presence there. And that's it. Thank you very much for watching. We've been Internally Screening. I've been Adam.
I've been Rupert.
And we'll catch you again next time. Peace.